Okay, cool. Looks like we have enough people to get started here. Um, like I was saying, this is the first of our fireside chat webinar series. So thank you for joining us. We're pretty excited to kick this off. We've had a lot of discussions with our peers, other founders, investors, and by popular demand, we're kind of bringing this series to bear. The central goal here is to start to debunk and help everyone, including ourselves, sort through the noise of everything that's going on within AI. And a lot of our clients right now are specifically focused on underwriting. So today's session will be kind of going through AI automation and underwriting as it pertains to risk assessments, as it pertains to what the status quo is, and sort of what you should be thinking about and looking forward to as you start moving up the maturity curve from an AI enablement perspective. Real quick, I'll give a quick background on myself, and then I'll kick it over to Ankur. I'm a former investment banker turned operator. Spent a few years in finance, ops, and go-to-market orgs at a few different AI companies. Now I work fractionally with a handful of clients, and have known Ankur for a few months now. So I am honored to be moderating today's fireside. Ankur, over to you. If you could just introduce yourself, why you started Multimodal, that'd be great.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Nathan. Thanks for that. So I'm Ankur, founder of Multimodal. At Multimodal, we do complex workflow automation. That could mean a lot of different things, but really the big idea here is that AI is now capable of doing a lot of the knowledge work that people do, particularly middle and back office functions. And that is a huge gain in terms of productivity and efficiency for a lot of organizations. And where we're really applying this is in underwriting. And so I think a lot of people, when they think about AI, they think about asking questions to a chatbot and getting responses back. But the same underlying technology can automate a lot of other functions when provided enough context, in the same way that employees are able to do really great work when provided enough context. And so we do that at Multimodal. We do that for a number of clients. We have ways of doing that really well. And I think these webinar series really articulate sort of why and how it's possible. A little bit of background here. So this is my third startup. I did Glean AI, which is a fintech startup in New York City, still around, automating invoice processing and analytics, going after Bill.com. And my prior experience is running a different set of ML teams at a couple of startups, one which we exited to Vista Equity Partners in 2018. So I've been in the machine learning camp for a long time, last 10 years or so. Back 10 years ago, there wasn't a whole lot you could do with NLP. And then it's gotten better and better. And I could speak to that journey and sort of where we are today and sort of where things go forward. But really the talk here is going to be actionable insight for people in your roles to apply AI in your various businesses.
Yeah, thanks for that. And sort of on that then, would love to get your read on how AI has transformed the traditional underwriting process in recent years. How did people solve some of these challenges historically? How have you seen it solved historically? And notably, how has AI improved that efficiency?
Yeah, absolutely. And when we look at underwriting, I think there are a lot of different functions in the process, right? But I think where AI has been helpful in the past has been mostly around document review. So taking in documents, adjusting them, categorizing the appropriate documents that are submitted as an underwriting process. And then in some cases, assisting humans in extracting values from those documents. So you can think of this as mostly document processing work. Unfortunately, I think the level of automation that is typically realized in underwriting is far below where companies want it to be. So document review is still very, very manual today. AI might extract some of the information, but a large amount still needs to be reviewed by humans. And I think where most companies operate is they hire BPOs, teams overseas to do the data entry and manage that. And this is the area that is, I think, most ripe for automation. But I think it doesn't need to stop there given where the technology is. So you can actually use AI to actually make a decision on the underwriting process. So you could actually approve, deny, or mark something as necessary for human review. So it becomes much more about triaging the higher flow of underwriting as opposed to doing just the document processing.
Got it. Yeah, super helpful. And on that, I think to your point, there's been a lot that's been done on the document processing side, and now we're getting into a new way of, the AI adoption curve, getting into workflow automation and triaging. Would be curious to hear more on, as it pertains to the capabilities of AI, what are the most common misconceptions about AI and underwriting?
So I think a couple of misconceptions are that you need a lot of data to actually get AI into a good performance state. And while it is true that the more data, the better, I think AI has come a long way. So I think 2-3 years ago, you would have needed thousands and thousands of documents of the same type to get a model that was even 70-80% good. Now, because the base models, these models from all of the closed and open source players like Anthropic, OpenAI, Meta with Llama, you actually need dozens of examples to get really, really great. So I think data requirements are a lot less, fortunately. And it's not just about extracting value from documents. You can actually, with enough context, make more of what I would say like cognition-driven decisions. So actually decide whether something should be approved or denied. And so AI doesn't need to be just one leg of that workflow that you do. You can actually start breaking the workflow up into a series of tasks and start automating them one by one. And once you do that, I think you're able to automate large swaths of a workflow as opposed to get stuck on just one portion.
Yeah, super helpful. So to that end, then, on the splitting up, a workflow into sort of component parts, I would love to better understand how companies and what they need to do to leverage AI effectively and how they should think about splitting up those workflows. And by extension, and maybe we can get to this later, also conscious of the fact that some of the folks participating today are at smaller companies and have, more limited resources, and how can they think about leveraging AI, if at all?
Yeah. So I think the first thing that I think you should do as an operator is identify which workflows your people are doing that are high volume. And the way we kind of do the back of the envelope math is if you have 5 or more people doing a particular workflow, that might be automatable in the sense that there's enough activity, enough volume where you can think about building a technological solution that would potentially reduce the amount of work from 5 people to 1 person, right? But if you have a workflow that only has maybe 1 or 1 people doing that volume, then there just might not be enough volume, right? Because even if you remove that 1 person, like 1 FTE in that particular function, the software getting that up and running might be pretty involved, right? And so you have to think about what should you even think about automating in the first place, and it's a function of volume. But the other bit is how documented is that workflow? Because the better the documented the workflow is, the more you could kind of think about a series of rules that could be applied. That's where AI is really great, right? So if basically you have a set of workflows that require a lot of like humans reading lots and lots of information from multiple places, it might be too complex for AI today. And so the more of the workflow that is more documentable, something you could document on paper, where there's a clear pattern, those are the ones that are ripe for automation. And that's the exercise I recommend every operator go through, because I think AI, when applied well in a very specific series of tasks or workflows, can deliver a lot of value. But if applied to the wrong set of problems, because maybe the volume isn't there or the problem is too complex and not quite automatable, that's where I think a lot of companies get stuck, where they don't see ROI at all and they get disillusioned by what AI is able to do.
Totally. And by extension, kind of for the smaller players, this heuristic of 5+ folks handling one workflow being ripe for automation, how would you suggest they go through that? Because often it would seem that and all the operators here who are at startups probably resonate, there's one person doing 5 workflows instead of 5 people doing one workflow. So how should people, think about that trade-off?
So if it's very low FTE, so very few people are doing a particular workflow because the volume isn't there, I highly recommend not to automate that. So that's an area where AI shouldn't quite yet be applied, right? And I think if those tasks are simple enough, like if simple workflow, simple tasks, you can think of like off-the-shelf solutions, because those might get the job done. but it's not something where you need a very heavy custom solution built out. That being said, if you have a workflow that is 10, 20 people, because there's a lot of document review, and you have difficulty maybe even sourcing enough people to do that function, or you're seeing a lot of turnover because it's too much grunt work, those are really ripe for automation. So it's just identifying what size of a company are you, how much volume are you experiencing, how many people do you have that doing that particular function, and if the answer is that you have a lot of people, there is a lot of volume, there is a pattern there that can be documented, then that's where you would really apply some of these models. And I think the choice in applying the models, I think there are a couple of big choices when you think about this. You can think about starting with closed source models, and we do recommend that. So starting with like an OpenAI model or an Anthropic model or Azure OpenAI, because you get to move a lot faster. These base models are a lot better out the door. Of course, security and privacy and data compliance considerations are really, really important. So a lot of companies start with closed source and they migrate to open source, because open source is harder to work with, but you get full control over the model. So if OpenAI makes a change to their GPT-4 model, GPT-3.5 model, that won't affect you because you have your own model. You control sort of when it gets updated, how it gets updated. And frankly, if you deploy it on your own infrastructure, none of the data leaves your walls, right? Which I think a lot of companies do prefer in the long haul. So it's basically starting with closed source, moving to open source. And what that also allows you to do is you get immediate ROI from closed source within a matter of like a few months if you do this right, which means that you then start seeing value in production, and it buys you more room, both in time and effort, to go build the open source version and then deploy it, because that journey might take 6 to 9 months, so considerably longer than the closed source journey.
Yeah, totally. And as I'm sure a lot of folks saw, the past week announcements, Meta's coming up with Llama 3. So that'll be exciting. We'll see how that fares against OpenAI's ChatGPT. No, that's super helpful. Before we move on past kind of where AI is in underwriting, would love to also double click maybe on some of the use cases that you were talking about. We painted kind of a broad stroke categorization of what kinds of processes AI can apply to. Would love to better understand from our work, from the experiences that you've had, what are some of those tangible use cases where you've seen AI fits from a complexity perspective, where it's just complex enough, where you need a custom solution, but not too complex that current AIs can't handle those use cases.
Yeah, so the one I touched on was more document review. So you get a document or set of documents, you need to classify the documents, extract the values. Typically, you're doing a couple other functions that are, well, I would say, like higher cognition work, which is corroborating income and identity, maybe checking what was submitted relative to what the applicant filled out in terms of the form, right? Because ultimately what you're trying to do is see how the data that they submitted, the supporting materials, map to their application. And then given that context, what credit profile do they have, right? And then given the risk profile, you're able to then apply the appropriate set of premiums, or you're able to assign the appropriate interest rate. So that entire workflow, from ingesting documents, classifying them, extracting key value pairs, and ultimately coming to a credit decision, all of that is highly automatable in the sense that AI is right for doing that. Now, it's not easy to do because the model needs the same context that your people, right? So it's not one model call. It's usually 6 to 10 LLM calls, large language model calls, in order to get that workflow done. But if you orchestrate the right set of calls with the right context, leveraging data that you have as a company, you can automate that. So that's one big area, and that's like a no-brainer. That's like low-hanging fruit. We work a lot with customers there. Highly recommend that people kind of go build in that space immediately. The less, what I'd say, less apparent AI applications are providing conversational interfaces to applicants, or even people that have bought, let's say, an insurance policy and insurance, or maybe they bought a mortgage and they just want a status update. When is the next payment due? When is the next renewal date? Is something covered under a particular insurance policy? Or if they're an applicant, maybe they just want notification on what the process looks like. They want an application status update. You shouldn't have to email someone to go get that information or call someone. You could just ask the question. AI is basically, it's connected to your internal database, and it's able to query against that and give you the right response back in natural language, right? And so all of a sudden you have just a much better product experience, a user experience. And that is another major application on the underwriting side that affects not operational efficiency, but it affects the revenue side of things and customer satisfaction and retention.
Total. Yeah. And now would love to double click a little bit into the, querying a database is no easy task. I mean, as we all know, data can get really messy. There's a lot of variability. There's a lot of complexity. And would love to understand from a high level technical perspective, how does AI handle that complexity and that variability in data right now?
Great question. And I think a lot of people, when they think of AI, at least generative AI or large language models, they think of ChatGPT, right? You ask a question, you get a response. And that traditionally is text to text. You ask a question. The model is not using any external data. It's just using the memory that it has from having trained on lots and lots of data, and it's responding. When we talk about querying databases, there's something much more complex at play. So basically, ask a question, the model is interpreting the question, and then converting that into a series of SQL. So it's essentially converting into code, querying the database. So similar to data analysts, so to try to figure out which database to query against, which set of tables in that database to use, which fields to use, and then ultimately, it basically gets a SQL statement that it needs to execute in order to get the right value from the right table to retrieve that. And then once it does, it converts that back into text. And while this sounds pretty complex in the sense that it's a series of SQL statements that have to be applied, AI can do this in about 60 to 90 seconds. And that's on the high end, right? Sometimes it could be a lot quicker, but you're basically getting results back in 90 seconds or less that would take way longer for a data analyst or data scientist to go and do. And it's able to go and give a response to the end user very, very quickly. That is exactly what they need to have. And the other way that the model gets better over time is that if people are asking about the same questions over and over again, the model doesn't need to dream up or it doesn't need to figure out what set of SQL statements to execute. It basically knows the SQL statement because basically you're just changing the name of the individual, maybe the policy number or the application number, and is able to get the right answer. And so instead of taking 60 seconds or 90 seconds, it's able to do that in 15 seconds, right? So it feels natural and intuitive. And typically when you ask these questions, there's a lot more friction. It could be hours or days before you get an appropriate response. And so the user experience is traditionally is very poor. This makes it much more real time. And that I think is an area of AI that I think a lot of companies don't think about, especially companies that are focused on underwriting, because you think of the application process, but the customer experience, user experience, which could really affect revenue. I think that is maybe not thought about quite enough. And I'll give you an example. One of our clients, they do mortgage origination, right? So we're helping them do the underwriting on mortgage applications, pretty straightforward, classifying documents, extracting values from documents, making a credit decision. But what it allows them to do is essentially make a real-time decision. It could be a non-binding approval with an interest rate to the applicant within minutes. So you apply for mortgage, you submit docs, within minutes, you get a response back saying you're approved, here's your interest rate. The fact that they get a response within minutes allows basically our client to have a much better chance of closing that. And this is true in underwriting in general. If you get back to your applicant sooner, you have higher odds of conversion, right? And so it affects the bottom line. It powers a wholly new product experience that wouldn't have been possible before the latest generation of AI.
This, I think, hopefully resonates in terms of the friction that can be caused with delays. I think one thing that maybe, or at least naturally came to my mind is, even if AI can drive these efficiencies, there's a lot of talk these days on, hallucinations and AI just making things up. And I guess, how can people evaluate solutions to ensure that, responses and queries are done in a way that prevents hallucinations to the extent possible?
Yeah. So phenomenal question. So, I can answer this for the two different types of workflows that I mentioned. So let's talk about that underwriting, like the application process where you submit documents. The way the model is grounded, which is a technical term we use to make sure it doesn't hallucinate, is let's say you're doing extraction of information from a bank statement. Once the AI receives the bank statement, the way this works is the bank statement is converted to machine readable data using OCR. That OCR data is fed into a large language model, and the large language model takes that input and is forced to convert that into a set of key value pairs, essentially fields with the appropriate values. So it could be the name of the individual, the account name, the account number, balance, the date, and a lot of things are on the bank statement, right? To corroborate income or net worth. Instead of just asking the large language model to convert the data from the bank statement, the OCR data from the bank statement into the key value pairs, you actually feed very similar documents to that bank statement to the model saying, this is how OCR data was converted in the past. Here are 3, 4, 5 examples. And by doing that, the large language model is able to understand that this is how previous documents of this type were converted from OCR data into key value pair data. And so when it has to do that with the document at hand, it is able to do that with that prior context in mind. And this comes after fine-tuning the model. So we're fine-tuning the model in dozens or hundreds or thousands of examples prior to this, but you also gave it a few more examples when you actually basically have it do the inference, and that grounds the model. That doesn't mean the model can always get it right. When we talk about automation right now for underwriting, we're talking about 80%, 90% straight through processing at best. So, and that's still really awesome. That's really high, right? 90% straight through processing means 9 out of 10 documents go through automatically without any human review, and then 1 out of 10 need human review. So there's always a place for a human to be involved in some of the documents. The model has never seen that. Humans will have to review it. But by giving the model enough examples at the time of prediction, it's able to have a much better chance of getting it right. And if it feels that there's too little confidence, what we do for our clients is that the models basically output something saying low confidence needs human review. And so you basically, as a user of the model, can understand when to trust the model. And you trust and verify, and you build that trust over time, over a set of months. And you could go and skip that step automatically. And you also have a better sense of when the model doesn't have enough confidence, where a human's still then reviewing it, right? And so triaging is the way to get automation done, which is you start baby steps, you maybe do 60, 70% of the workflow, and you work your way up to that 80, 90%, which is the optimal goal for a lot of these workflows.
And when it comes to, let's say, accuracy, right? There's 9 out of 10 we can pass through accurately with confidence. Would love to better understand, again, based on your experience, how does a model from an accuracy standpoint really fare against a human? Like, is the incremental efficiency worth the efficacy or potentially lack thereof?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think I can speak a lot from my experience at Glean AI, where we were extracting invoices down to the line item level. Highly applicable because invoices are highly variable. They're actually more complex than you would think, and in many ways similar to the type of document classification extraction that is done in underwriting. The process that we stood up at Glean, we needed 2 sets of humans. One set of humans would do the initial extraction of the data, and the second set of humans would corroborate that the first set of humans did it right. So you basically need a 2-step process to get to 99% accuracy. That is really involved, right? To have 2 sets of humans get to 90% accuracy. Once we introduced the model, we're able to skip 1 set of humans. So basically the model was able to do the first pass at a high level and then skip the second pass. But eventually the model became better than the people. And the reason why I did that was, basically your top, like, let's say 20% of your staff, the BPO that's doing this function, document extraction, might be very good. And they're going to be really, really great. The other 80%, or let's say the bottom 30%, are actually not going to be very good. That's where you'll typically have to let people go, might have churn because it's a front work essentially at the end of the day, and they feel burnt out. And so employee retention is hard. And then employee performance is also problematic. And so think of the model as learning from the 20% that are the best at their job at document extraction. So the model is as good as the 20% that are best at what they do, which means that on average, the model is going to get better than the average person, your average employee in this role. So we often say, the model quickly gets to what is average human performance at this function at your company. And then eventually gets to above average because it's able to index off of the work that your 20% best people are doing. Right. And that's a huge one. It's not just speed. It's not just cost. You actually just get more consistency and more accuracy in terms of your results. And not to mention that it powers better product experience. So I think a lot of people, they get discouraged because they might not see the outcomes from applying AI or investing in AI. ROI cycles might be long, but when you do get it right, it's incredible. I mean, the ROI that you experience is massive, not only from cost reduction perspective, but in terms of having entirely new experiences for your customers, like instant decisions.
Totally. Yeah. It's like having an army of your top performers working 24/7.
That's right.
Yeah. No, this is great. I think, just conscious of time and with Q&As, let's now look ahead, kind of what to expect. What should we be thinking about? And I think the first thing that comes to mind really is, how can companies ensure that their workforce is ready to adapt, to AI-driven underwriting processes? I mean, it's a fundamentally different way of working. So how can they gear up for that? How can they communicate the change, right, in the nature of workforce responsibilities?
Great question. I think some people go at AI and automation as this thing to fear because it's going to displace jobs and displace roles and whatnot. I think having worked with customers at Multimodal for the last year plus, and then basically done clean AI for the last many years since 2019. Surprisingly, people aren't they're not afraid of AI like once you understand how it works, because essentially what AI is doing, what these models are doing, is the grunt work that you no longer want. I mean, you don't want to be doing, right? It's the work that's like least desirable. And since a lot of these people, your employees are really valuable, they have deep domain knowledge, they've been at your company for some time, they will do more valuable work once this particular function gets automated. And so they get to do the work that they enjoy more of. They're more valuable people to the org. It does mean that, basically you have to hire fewer people, like fewer additional people in this role. It may mean that you're brought 20%, which will likely they'll either leave or you'll have to fire them. Like that portion will get affected, but I think the majority are not affected. They're actually augmented, supported by AI, right? It makes them better at their job. And so they actually welcome that. And so that's from our experience working with clients, but I think it needs to be framed that way from the very beginning, where AI is not this thing that's trying to displace you or automate your role. It is going to make you better and faster at your entire function, allowing you to do more of the work that you enjoy. The other big things that I think organizations need to think about is that they need to get their data in order, because the more data you have, the better data you have, the higher level automation you'll experience. And then really invest in your domain knowledge, right? Your particular way of underwriting, the process, the rules you have in place, that's where your secret sauce is. I think over time, some of the friction that exists because of these operational workflows, like ingesting documents, classifying documents, extracting values, making credit decisions, that can be automated away using data and your domain expertise that you acquired over many, many years. That remains, right? So invest in the areas that you're best on. And then I think on the technology side, the technology will continue to get better. And then you either build it in-house or you go with vendors like us that have an experience of automating this. But I think really it's preparing the workforce to view AI in a more realistic and more favorable light than it's commonly portrayed by Hollywood or media.
Yeah. No, it's helpful. And I think from my end, I just want to emphasize this piece of, at least for me, it's when people think about AI, it's always a discussion around data. I think it's a really interesting kind of call out here that you made on part of the secret sauce of running a company is also the execution and the processes that you built. And just because you are an underwriting company doesn't mean that your process is the same as this other underwriting company. And I think, just very much so appreciate that call out there. And I'd say the last question before we turn it over to everyone who's in attendance is putting sort of workforce readiness and future of work aside as it pertains to AI. Would love to understand what are some of the emerging trends within AI that companies should be preparing for. I know you touched on it a little bit earlier, but things like AI is now a revenue center, not just a cost center, and would love to understand that a bit more.
Yep. Yeah, in fact, I think that's a big one, which is it's not just a cost reduction play. It really is a enabler of new product experiences. So it becomes as important for the revenue side in order to stay competitive and win market share as it is to the operations front. So I think that's pretty big. I think the other big things are I think AI's the best AI is super invisible to the end user. So it's not like you have to go to a chat bot, you're asking questions and it feels like the AI is responding. If you have basically workflows like either email or chat around underwriting, so basically underwriting decisions and how that works and whatnot, the handoff between AI and people should be super seamless, right? So we're seeing a whole lot of that, which is companies are thinking about how to get these models to basically triage the high volume of customer support tickets and application tickets that they see on the underwriting process, which makes for a better customer experience. I think the nature of AI and like what artificial intelligence is able to do is expanding pretty rapidly. So because a problem is not tractable today before, if the problem is not tractable today or not automatable today, doesn't mean that it won't be automatable in the next year or 2 or 3 years. So deciding what should you focus your attention on in the sense that the technology is ripe enough to actually do the thing that you need to automate and answering that question well and leaving the rest for the future is really, really important. So I think that's a big pivotal piece, which is meet the technology where it is today, as opposed to trying to go and stretch too much into areas that potentially artificial intelligence isn't quite ready to go tackle just yet.
Yeah. And I guess one follow-up on that piece then is how do you think companies should evaluate what is and isn't possible? I mean, to your point, AI is developing and evolving at kind of unprecedented rates here. And so what is the best way to really evaluate what's the right solution? Also given how many there are in the market.
Yeah. I understand the dilemma, right? I think a year ago, 2 years ago, I would say like maybe 2-3 years ago, AI and ML was a niche kind of term in many ways. You had a niche set of players. Now, basically every company is an AI company or ML company, either from a marketing perspective or because they have some version of AI embedded. So it's really hard as a buyer to say which company should you go with versus not. Here's the way I would kind of look at it. When this comes down to like a buy versus build decision, right? I think if you have deep expertise in machine learning because you have a large team doing that today, and this is so near and dear to who you are in terms of your core DNA as a company. And this is true for like Google and Amazon, and others where they do end-to-end. They do machine learning in-house. It's deeply tied into the way that the product development works. They build it out. And so they basically build everything, right? They don't really buy from other players quite as much. I think when we look at a lot of companies that are doing underwriting to insurance companies and companies that are the banking sector, doing loan origination and such, their core DNA is not in machine learning per se. They might have data teams, they might have some machine learning function. But their core DNA is what they do best, which is deep domain knowledge around underwriting and managing claims and managing applications, managing loans, right? Like it's more on the finance or the insurance side. And so typically the choice comes down to which vendor to pick. And I think there are a couple options. You can try to find a one size fits all. So basically you buy something that is more of an opinion SaaS player built for your vertical. And for some companies that does work well because it's easy. You kind of bring it on, it's cheap, and it more or less does the job. I think that if you are a larger company, you have a particular way of doing underwriting. The decision comes down to you're basically getting the model built out around your own process. So you want to have a model that is customized for your particular workflow. And I think right now the choices are you go with a consulting firm that is very sizable, like an Accenture, BCG, McKinsey, Bain, and you do that. And that takes usually longer, it's more expensive. But I do think that there are players that are emerging in this space. I mean, we're one of them. There are others as well. that really focus on customizing the model to the extent that it needs to be customized, but it's much more product-led, which means the time to ROI is a few months as opposed to a year or two. The cost is a lot less. And then it's like a traditional software player. You basically get to have a long-time vendor relationship where the vendor, in this case, Multimodal or someone similar, is managing and maintaining that software, because that's not where your core competency likely is. I mean, it could be, but in most cases it's not, right? It's technology vendor that is going to upgrade LLMs. When new LLMs come out, like a Llama 3, they're going to do the fine tuning periodically. They'll push software updates to do better for inference optimization. They'll leverage the latest GPUs. There are dozens and dozens of very complex decisions around this that even if you're a very sizable company, you may not have the expertise in-house or frankly, the attention in-house to go and solve that. And so bringing a vendor that can bring the technology, really construct that around your way of underwriting, so your deep domain knowledge, ideally deploying it on your infrastructure. So basically no data leaves your walls, right? And it's working alongside your employees. That's like the holy grail scenario. So that's what I think comes down to, is either you decide to buy from an external vendor and then it's a matter of choosing which vendor, or it's basically building it in-house. But I will say the biggest emphasis should be on very short cycles in terms of evaluating vendors, making sure that the ROI is quick to see. And if it's not, then it's basically going in and basically choosing another vendor. Right? I think these long, lengthy cycles of waiting for ROI, I think many become getting frustrated with that. So it's really speed to ROI. That's probably the number one thing you should look for. And I think that could be what I would say is like the North Star in terms of making your decision.
Got it. Super helpful. Now just, with the 20 or so minutes that we have left, want to make sure that we have enough time for questions. There's already a few in the Q&A. So I guess we'll kind of go in order here. These were all submitted anonymously, but if you feel that I'm not representing your question correctly, please just submit another question and I will see it. So the first one is, what are the hard costs associated with implementing an AI solution? Is the bulk of the costs passed along to the customer? The IP and the time of the knowledge workers needed to support the So I guess costs from a financial perspective, costs from a time of knowledge workers needed to support the implementation, and how are those handled? Are they passed along to the customer, or should the provider handle that?
Yeah, so great question. I'm going to unpack this a little bit because I think there's a lot here. So I think if you decide to build in-house, you're basically taking all of that cost in-house, right? So you do need to get ML expertise in terms of ML engineers, ML ops engineers. You need to build the infrastructure on your cloud or on-prem. You need to bring your own knowledge workers to inform how the AI should be built. So they're working alongside your own ML engineers and ML ops engineers. So that's kind of like what I'd say is build everything in-house. You're incurring all of the hard costs internally. So that's one extreme option. The other option is you use something that's maybe off the shelf. So it gets you somewhat of the way there. So you buy from a technology vendor, and then you do some of the work in-house. So it might offset some of the time and effort that's required. So you're not building from scratch, but you're taking something off the shelf and then making that work for you. So that's going to be time from your core ML engineering and ML ops team and your knowledge workers, but it's going to be less. So the time to value is going to be a little bit faster. But the trade-off is that you have to pay a vendor over time, right? So it's amortizing some of the costs that you would have to spend if you built it in-house. I think the other option, which is more of a white glove option, right, which is the consulting firms or product-led companies like ours that are doing this is, and the reason why we do this, I'll articulate why we do this at Multimodal, just to give the audience an example of kind of the rationale for why we do what we do, and presenting that as an option to companies is we do the bulk of the customization that's required to get high levels of automation. We do that for our clients today. And the reason why we do it is it's very, very difficult work that unless you have deep knowledge of basically working with large language models and customizing them to get really good model task alignment, around what knowledge workers are doing, you'll get stuck in low-level automation. And if you get stuck in low-level automation, you might as well not bring AI to the table at all, because AI is going to be automating maybe 10, 20% of the workflow. The people are still doing the bulk of it. Like, why even bother? You're gonna beat your head on the wall type. It's going to be one of those scenarios. And I think that's where machine learning has been in the last 5 years or 10 years. It's been too low level of automation. Now you can get to high level levels of automation depending on the workflow you pick. But the task of aligning the model to the work that the knowledge workers are doing is very hard. So we do that for the customers to make it frictionless for them to adopt AI. So all they have to do, the time and effort they have to provide, is access to the knowledge workers. So we understand how are the knowledge workers making decisions that they need to make, because we feed to the models the same context that the knowledge workers have. So if the knowledge workers are trained a particular way to make decisions on underwriting application, we will align the model around that same exact process. We're basically replicating the knowledge work, but doing it programmatically. And the only thing that is left to the engineering team is the integration, which happens to be in the form of an API, which all software developers know how to use. And so it's a universal language that's easy to adopt. And by doing that, we basically make it possible for our clients to see something in production within about 2 to 3 months. And we feel that more and more companies should actually do that. So whether it's multimodal or a company like ours, that really should be the ask, is seeing an ROI on the time frame 2 to 3 months as opposed to 18 months.
Yeah, that's super helpful. And that actually leads into another question that we have here quite beautifully, which is basically around, are there any challenging platforms or APIs that make the implementation of a solution like ours at Multimodal harder?
Yeah. Great question. And actually, let me touch on the kind of the last bit of the last question, because I think that actually dovetails into this a little bit, which is, do we see the development of out-of-door pricing associated with AI implementation going up or down over the next 5 years? AI implementation should get cheaper over time, because basically the challenge right now is very, very hard to stand up the entire infrastructure to do AI well. I don't want to get too deep in the weeds here, but you have things like a Kubernetes cluster with GPUs, you have vector database, conventional database, you have the large language models that are fine-tuned, you have model registries, Docker repository, you have inference optimization libraries. All of this needs to then be rolled up into a single API, but it is technically very hard. And I think there are a lot of great companies that are being funded right now that are doing ML ops or ML ops related infra. And as more of those come online, it's going to be easier to do AI implementation. So the cost should go down. And so the question here is, what are there particularly challenging platforms and APIs that make implementation of multimodal AI solution harder? Yes, I think right now ML ops is fairly immature in terms of having enough software and vendors out there that could help monitor a large language model, help provide interpretability as to how a large language model got to a particular decision, providing sort of making it less black box, right? So because a lot of these things are missing, we as a company at Multimodal are having to build a lot of this ourselves. So we call them primitives or building blocks that help us move faster and getting value to clients faster, and then providing non-technical users on our client side visibility into how decisions get made, so they could trust the AI as opposed to having it as a black box. So I think the fact that there isn't great ML tooling out there today, just quite yet, is making it harder to get implementation done. I think over time this gets easier, and so I think we're building tooling ourselves to help us support this. But I think the broader ecosystem is also building tooling here. So I'm pretty excited to see how that pans out. But I will say it's very, very hard for companies to build ML software in-house. And this is the reason why I think a lot of companies start with design partners, usually in the form of external vendors, whether it's Multimodal or Accenture, McKinsey, Bain, those guys.
Totally. Very helpful. And actually a follow-up to that is, the black box is something that everyone's always concerned about with AI. And you mentioned that we're building some of those primitives and building blocks in-house. Would love to just understand how we come to those decisions and how we figure out what types of primitives to be building, and what have clients generally in totality, I suppose, wanted out of that visibility?
Yeah, so great questions. I think visibility can mean a lot of things, but one type of visibility is when, and this is like maybe in the database AI example where you ask a question and then the model is giving you the right answer from a SQL database somewhere. I think the visibility there that clients really want is, and then this is like for underwriting decisions, for example, when the user asks a question, it needs to be clear how the model got to the answer that it did. And so you really need to be able to have the model cite exactly what did it use to derive the right answer. And by doing so, you're able to see how the model got to either the right or wrong answer. And if it got to the wrong answer, you at least know basically why it got to the wrong answer. You're able to go and diagnose that. It's similar to how if an employee made a wrong decision, you're able to go and kind of work through their line of reasoning and then help them come to the right decision the next time. I think that visibility, that interpretability is critical. And so we're building those types of primitives, right? What I'd say is like the primitives that make something work in production versus just being a nice science fair project. We don't want to get stuck in like, okay, this kind of does the job, but no one understands how it got to the right answer and occasionally fails. And we don't even know how it fails or why it fails. You got to go and build all the things that really matter in a production setting, which is interpretability, visibility, observability, like all of these things that give you more confidence to the point where you can actually trust AI. Because until that trust is built in this new technology around underwriting or anything that's mission critical, the willingness of big organizations to adopt this in production just won't be there.
Totally. Makes a lot of sense. And with that, I mean, we still have 10 minutes. I don't know if anyone else has any additional questions. If not, I'll give 30 seconds for anyone who wants to type. But while people figure that out, wanted to flag one other thing is, well, first of all, thank you for joining, but definitely want to flag that we know how difficult and complex AI is and can be, and that there's no way to cover everything that you need to know tailored to your specific use case within an hour-long, somewhat generalized webinar discussion. So after this, I'll be sending out a follow-up email where we've opened up a few slots on Awkwar's calendar so that you can kind of book time with him and maybe better discuss how AI can be leveraged at your org specifically. This is sort of outside of the scope of multimodal and more so kind of we just think that AI is super cool. That's why we're building in the space, and we want to make sure that you can build in that space too. So just want to open that up and flag that for everyone. Will the recording be made available? Great question. It will be. Give us some time to kind of go through. I mean, Zoom, whenever it downloads the cloud and all that, but it will be made available. We'll make sure to send out a link as well so that you can watch it again on your own time.
Nathan, just to add on, I know someone did ask about primitives, so let me just articulate that a little bit more because I think this is super critical, right? And I think this is it might help inform the buy versus build decision. And even if it's build, I think I highly recommend that if your org is investing in AI and machine learning and is thinking about building everything in-house, that you build primitives. So primitives are, I think Nathan did a good job articulating, but to go a little bit deeper, it's basically the foundational building blocks that allow engineers to move faster at building really great machine learning solutions. So the reason why, for example, Uber or Google or Amazon is able to do really incredible things building is their engineers have built a lot of great tooling for use internally to allow the next engineer to have an easier time to go and build ML, right? I often say that it's really hard to get hired by AWS or Google, but it's so easy once you're there. But once you're there, you have all of these primitives, these low-level building blocks already available to you. And so things that would have taken you much longer to go build are much quicker to build now because you have the collective wisdom of engineers at Google or Amazon and having built out the primitives for you to then build on top of. So the reason why multimodal is able to do deployment super fast is we have a bunch of building blocks that do things like OCR. Right? We have 4 different OCR engines are optimized for all different types of documents. So that's one big thing that could have taken your team 4 to 6 months to go build. we can do this in 24 hours. The next thing is aligning the model using few-shot learning. So basically examples to help align the model with what task needs to get done. That's again a building block that we've already figured out. We know how to basically convert that into ways that the model can understand and then feed that in. So again, we're using that, leveraging that from customer to customer. I mean, there are a whole host of other things. Deploy Kubernetes with the appropriate GPUs with inference optimization. We have primitives to do fine tuning, to do pre-training. We have primitives to stand up vector databases. Basically, all these things that basically you need to do to build out really great automation that would take your internal team months to go and do. The whole point is not to repeat every single time from scratch. It's to use templates. So you're almost 80%, 90% of the way there. That final 10% of customization, which we do work on this for our clients, right? We're customizing the model for our clients specifically. That takes 3 months, but that takes 3 months and not 18 months because the bulk of that work aren't handled by the primitives that we've built out today. And so I highly recommend it. It's just a really good design principle for, I would say, all machine learning companies, whether it's multimodal or multimodal lookalikes, to go in and think about doing.
On the customization, I think I just really want to emphasize that a lot of companies, when they say customization, don't actually get to the level of depth right here. It's very surface level, kind of like, here is some data, here is some of your workflow. Like the customization that we do, and the reason it takes so long is because it's customized on all of the internal data that's relevant and all of the workflows that are relevant, right? It's not just one piece of the puzzle. It's how do all of these component parts feed together to create one seamless process through which an AI can make an automated decision versus just pieces. So just want to highlight that. So yeah, with that, 4 minutes, but we'll give you guys back 4 minutes. Look out for a follow-up from us.
I think Jason did have a question. Sorry, Nathan, did want to interrupt. So Jason had a question if we have additional resources. So I think to answer that, Jason, I think we will prepare more resources. Definitely want to prepare more content around everything that we've learned and are learning, and want to share that with the community. I think to Nathan's point, like part of what we're doing is certainly we obviously want more people to be doing AI, doing automation. So we want to evangelize that as much as possible. Maybe people don't make some of the mistakes that we've made. Maybe they could learn from the ways that we're doing AI today. But we have a whole lot more work to do in terms of getting this on paper and articulating it. I think this will be the first of a series of webinars we do, so per month. So Nathan, let's maybe articulate what the next set of webinar or the next webinar that will be in the topic. But I think that will be a great resource, and then we'll certainly do follow-up, either posts or videos related to more of this. And I think the idea here with the webinar is this was kind of like a burst of our series, more of a quick fireside chat. I think we will have some more industry veterans and experts, maybe potential clients. We might even do some workshops that are more hands-on. But the idea is just sharing our story, what we've learned along the way, and then hopefully getting others in the community to also join so they could talk about their own journey working with in this AI space more broadly. Again, just to articulate basically mistakes to avoid making and learnings that I think could be very helpful to the broader space at large.
Thanks for that. And thanks for catching that. I'll be sure to also send out, Ankur didn't call this out specifically, but we do have podcasts and blogs as well that I'll make sure to send as part of the follow-up, where you can see some of the thoughts that we've been thinking through. But yeah, thanks for that. Cool. Thanks again. This is probably my third time saying thank you, but given the engagement here, and definitely appreciate the level of engagement from a Q&A perspective. But I want to say thank you again for attending.
Yeah, appreciate the time, everyone. Thanks for joining.
All right. Take care. Have a great evening. Bye, y'all.